Everybody, welcome back for day 2. I hope everybody enjoyed the meeting yesterday. Aaron and I were talking. It was 2017 that we met in preparation for the conference in Charlottesville that some of you attended. And so that means Aaron and I are having our 5th anniversary this week. And we appreciate all you coming to the party. But good morning, Aaron. It was interesting last night. I enjoyed listening to the speaker from UVA talking about the demographic changes. And boy, when you start seeing it square up with more older people, including myself, for fewer younger people, we do really need to figure out a way to take advantage of every drop of talent and energy and goodwill that these people have. And so I think it's very timely this morning that our topic is economic mobility. But you saw that, and it doesn't mean it has to go up 95 like the doctor said last night. It can be other places too, and as you change the paradigm. But this morning's topic, economic mobility, discussion is going to be led by Barry Duvall, who is going to talk a little bit about Blueprint Virginia. Barry and I came to Richmond at the same time. I was appointed secretary in 2010. Barry came to be president of the Chamber of Commerce of Virginia in 2010. He has roots in this area, councilman and mayor of Newport News. He was involved in economic development in Southeast Virginia, came to the chamber, has been telling governors what to do ever since, and secretaries occasionally. But he reminded me we started together a healthcare conference in June, and the 10th one will be this June 2nd. And I've already told Barry I've got a colonoscopy scheduled that day, so I don't. But anyway, it's too much information. Yeah, for Barry. But anyway, we'll work it out, Barry. That's okay. But I think this is really important. Our panel is really top-notch this morning. We are missing Deetra Trent. We'll tell you, Deetra was going to come. For those who knew, she was Secretary of Education in McAuliffe administration, went to George Mason, and she's at the White House now. But unfortunately, she is sick, and so she let us know she couldn't be here. But with that, Barry, come on and enlighten us this morning. Tell us what to do.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much. Well, good morning. It is great to see all of you here. I was sharing with Charlotte a few minutes ago and Victor that I have wonderful memories in this room. Last time I was in this room was about 4 years ago, and I was celebrating in a reception the wedding of my last child. And that child was a female. So for those of you who are in the wealth management business, you know that I'm working a few more years than I had planned, but we have great memories in this ballroom. This wall actually opens up and you can double the size, and you can put a dance floor here, and I had my last dance there with her, and she is been successfully married now for about 5 years. This is a great facility. I like it more when the air conditioning is working. But I work in Richmond, and I have a place there, but I also have a place here. So I was excited about being able to come home from Richmond and spend the night here and come over. So you all are gathering, I think, for the first conference of this kind. I think it's appropriate that you gather and come together, not only to make connections with each other, but to have a perspective on the role of philanthropy. And I was really honored when Dr. Hazel called and asked would I participate in this event. I at first wasn't exactly sure how the structure of this event would look and what the role of the chamber might be. But after having a chance to talk to Katie and Dr. Hazel, it seemed like an appropriate time for the chamber to come to an event like this and talk about business role in improving economic mobility of individuals and businesses' role in working with philanthropy. I don't know how many of you have ever read about Milton Friedman or know. Anybody know who Milton Friedman is in the room? A few of you, yes. Have some MBAs in the room, I assume. So he was stood about 5 feet tall, but was a giant, a giant thinker in economics. And Milton Friedman is a Nobel Prize winner and funded and founded the business school in Chicago. And Milton Friedman passed several years ago, but he's very famous for his economic profile and the role of business and how economies are most efficient and effective. His Chicago theory helped actually establish free enterprises around the world, including Santiago, Chile, and helping them turn around that country's economy when it was in crisis. But Milton Friedman had this statement about the purpose of business and what is the purpose of business. And his purpose and his mantra was that it was to return wealth to the shareholders. Return wealth to the shareholders. And that had been a focus for decades and decades of business leaders. Well, a few years ago, the Business Roundtable in America, which is the top 100 CEOs, adopted a new resolution for business. And that is that business has a commitment to stakeholders. And those stakeholders do not only represent shareholders, but those stakeholders represent the communities in which they do business, the environment in which they do business, and how they govern themselves. And this became more commonly known as ESG. And the ESG is now a score that businesses receive from shareholders. So it's really fascinating as I've seen businesses invest in their community and increase their investment in philanthropy and see their role as not just helping shareholders, but see their role as helping the community in which they do business, protecting the environment, and being conscientious about the way they govern. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Katie told me I could speak as long as I want. The panel could be up here as long as we wanted, but you guys were definitely taking a break at 10 o'clock. So we'll be done before 10. I was asked to talk a little bit about the Virginia Chamber, our mission, our vision, and what is a blueprint for Virginia. So let me briefly do that, and I'll go through these slides pretty quickly and bring the panel up in about 7 or 8 minutes. So the Virginia Chamber of Commerce is a state chamber. We're not the US Chamber, we're not the local chamber, but we're the voice of Virginia business. And we have a significant reach around the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's important to also understand we don't endorse candidates for office. We only endorse ideas. And we are nonpartisan, and we work with parties, both political parties. Yesterday in Richmond, I presented Legislative Year Award to a senator. I presented a Legislative Year Award to a delegate. One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. I presented Free Enterprise Awards yesterday to members of the General Assembly that supported the blueprint and free enterprise, Republicans and Democrats. Why? Because we think businesses should endorse ideas and not necessarily candidates. And so we're a nonpartisan organization, but in the last 12 years, we've grown. This is a map of Virginia, and every dot represents 25 members. We're the largest business organization in the state. There are about 4.4 million people working in Virginia, with about 28,000 businesses, and many of them large businesses, but about 20,000 have fewer than 50 employees. We can reach about 1.1 million working Virginians with a message. That message might be around a specific piece of legislation and asking their General Assembly member to vote for it or vote against it. The best example over the last several years would be that we had a new transportation bill passed about 6 years ago, bringing about $6 billion of new transportation funding to Virginia, which we're now seeing the benefits of over the last several years. That would not have happened, not because of the state chamber, but because of the local businesses that contacted their members of the General Assembly. So having a reach throughout the state has been important for us from an advocacy perspective. But if you were to ask me what is the single purpose of the state chamber, what is our core purpose, it would be for Virginia to be the best state for business. The best state for business. We compete worldwide, but we compete with 49 other states. The great thing about America is we have some federal protections and some federal guidelines, but we have states' rights. And these states' rights are very important for commerce, and so we are competing for our competitiveness as a state. And so we want to be the best state for business. We've done really well lately. A few years ago, we got CNBC's top state for business. We were able to repeat that. We've also been focusing as a state chamber on some other rankings. So the business facility ranking, we were best business climate, top tech pipeline, and top state for cybersecurity. Wallet Hub, which measures a lot of things, including military retirees, ranked us last year as the best state for military retirees. Very important for Virginia. And they also ranked us the 5th most innovative state. Some other rankings that we are looking at now as a Commonwealth is how are we doing with equity? How does Virginia rank in this area? And again, this has become more of a national focus for states. And according to US News ranking last year, Virginia was 7th, but on equality, we were number 5. As best state, we're number 7, and for equality, we were number 5. So we are now being looked at as a Commonwealth about how are we doing with the education gap, the employment gap, employment by race and by gender. So these are things the state chamber is now focused on. And I think it's appropriate that we focus on these initiatives. We have a 501c3 foundation, and we develop our ideas through Blueprint Virginia. Some of you may know that Virginia is unique in several ways, but you may not realize we're the only state in the country that does not allow a governor to run for re-election. So great governors don't get to have a second term, and less than great governors don't get to have a second term. We just give them 48 months and they leave. But if you're in business, you want to think beyond 48 months, right? You want to think long term. How many of us need to think long term? So how do we ensure as business that we have a blueprint for Virginia as business people? Well, we come together through a process, and I'll quickly go through that process, and we present a blueprint to the newly elected governor. So we've done that now consistently, and our national rankings have improved. This was Terry McAuliffe 2 weeks after he was elected governor in 2013 in front of about 1,000 business people. We present this at our economic summit. That was our first blueprint. Our next blueprint was presented to Ralph Northam just a few weeks after he was elected at our economic summit. And we've had a lot of success in education and workforce programs. I won't go into these now. We've had a lot of success in infrastructure and transportation and a number of important initiatives. And then this was in December, a few weeks after Glenn was elected governor. We presented him the Blueprint 2030 plan. Now, this is important to remember. This is not a Barry Duvall plan. This is not a Virginia Chamber plan. It's a business plan for the Commonwealth. And I'll just share a little bit about the process. Ed Bain co-chaired this with Nasa Keene, business leaders. We had a steering committee, advisory committee. We worked regionally because really Virginia grows and prospers not along political boundaries. Virginia grows and prospers along economic boundaries. And you have to think that way because that's how business is done and that's how Virginia grows. So go Virginia. Lots of regional hosts around the state. And we developed meaningful partnerships with other chambers and other business organizations. So Metropolitan Business League, Hispanic Chamber, the Black Chamber, Urban League, and the like. We had regional tours that involved over 2,000 participants, but in total, we had about 7,000 Virginians develop this blueprint. That's powerful. We had over 100 economic development agencies endorse the blueprint. That's powerful. And localities and regional economic groups. So our theme for this blueprint is that we want an economy for all. Every Virginian, maybe not every region grows at the same rate, but we want every region growing. These are our 11 focus areas. I'll talk about these a little bit later. But throughout each of the areas of blueprint, we have a theme of how do we expand and improve our diversity and our equity and our inclusion. Bill, whether that's in healthcare, which we'll talk about at our healthcare conference, whether it's in economics, which Victor Branch will talk about the economic gap and what some of the businesses are doing, and certainly Bank of America, and thank them for being one of our sponsors, are doing to close the economic gap. But we in the Chamber have put forward a 4-point plan on how we as a business community can work with public policymakers to close the education gap, the employment gap, the entrepreneur gap, as well as we have leaned in on some criminal justice reform. Someone said to me, why are you getting involved in criminal justice reform? I mean, the Chamber's never gotten involved in criminal justice reform. And I said, we can't leave anyone behind. We need every Virginian to have every opportunity in the future for their life and for Virginia's good. So we supported the expungement of some misdemeanor charges and other things that people do when they're young and silly that shouldn't hold them back for their future economic profile. And we leaned in and worked with the Black Caucus on a number of initiatives to help improve the viability of employment for Virginians. And it's the right thing to do. So I just will point you to our website. We have a fantastic website with videos. You can download this with a QR code and look at it. Don't do it while my panel's going on. Dr. Dietrich Trent, actually in the middle there, led the workforce section of Blueprint as former Secretary of Education, along with some other business leaders. You can look at early childhood education. You'll hear from Kathy in a minute, but each area is focused on in a way that demonstrates the business community's support for improving Virginia's prosperity, having an opportunity for an economy for all. And then we use the blueprint to go to the General Assembly and go to the governor and go to our congressional leaders and say, here are some opportunities for public policy that will improve Virginia's prosperity for all people. And that's the blueprint. That's what we use at the State Chamber. Local chambers are involved in it. And if you have any questions on it, I'd be glad to visit with you at the break. So with that, I'm excited about our panel. I'll ask them to join me on stage. As they come up, I will tell you that we're looking forward to a conversation, and we may have audience participation. So be thinking about what you want to ask one of these important panelists. Each of you should have a handheld mic. And I'll just start with you, Danny, and ask you each to introduce yourselves. I know they have your bios, a little bit about the organization you represent, and then we'll start our questions. I'll start, Danny, with you.
Good morning. My name is Danny Avula. I am here, probably my biggest connection here is as a trustee of the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation for the last, 8 years or so. It's been an incredible experience to be drawn into the philanthropic community and to learn just about the incredible work that you all do. I spent the last year as we were all sort of figuring COVID out together, helping lead the state's vaccination effort. But prior to that, I spent the better part of a decade as a local public health officer. And so I was the public health director for the city of Richmond and the county of Henrico. And in that role, really thinking broadly about health, community health, what are the drivers at a population level of poor health outcomes, and how do we band together to help improve health and improve opportunity for all people in Richmond and Henrico and ultimately across the state. And all of those good deeds landed me the role that I'm in now, which is Governor Youngkin appointed me as the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services. And so this is a brand new world to me in many ways, but a huge opportunity to help some of the most vulnerable residents of the state.
Everyone, I'm Kathy Glazer, president of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, and I've had the pleasure of having that role for the last 10 years, and so tickled to be up here with some of my favorite people in the world. And as I said to Danny, he likes to jump from the frying pan into the fire, and we're also so lucky that he's willing to do so. I've also really enjoyed relationships with many of you in this room around funding for early childhood development, and just really glad to be here today and and say that I feel, even after a slog of 10 years of working hard in this area, I feel more optimistic now than I ever have, and really excited to share with you some of the opportunities we have moving forward.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Turned it off? Maybe this will help. Hello? Woo! Did I wake you? Good morning. My name is Victor Branch, and I'm the president of Bank of America Richmond Region, where I've been all of my career when I came off the campus of William & Mary. So this is coming home for me in Williamsburg.
Very good.
And it's so exciting to be here with this great panel of friends and community leaders, and here with you all who are so engaged in the good work that is taking place throughout Virginia. I'm not your traditional banker. I've been on the corporate philanthropy side of Bank of America now, gosh, Charlotte, I can't believe it's almost 20 years. I've had the pleasure and the privilege to do the work that Bank of America is doing in our communities for that long, and I've gotten to meet so many of you through doing that work. And it's a blessing when your passion and your values align with the opportunity to get paid for it. And so it's exciting to be a part of this conference, and I thank my colleague and my friend Erin for her engagement and leadership around getting Bank of America involved in the Virginia Funders Network and all the good stuff that is happening there. So I'm excited about this discussion, Barry. So,
Well, keep the mic, and I'll ask you the first question. The Bank of America has a reputation that is absolutely outstanding in the nation, and across the country, their environmental, social, and governance work has been well recognized. In fact, in the last 2 years combined, the bank has pledged more than $1.25 billion in philanthropy initiatives. And I think it's important for the audience to understand how you're deploying these funds, and are there any examples, Victor, that you can provide that Bank of America has partnered with organizations in this regard?
thank you, Barry, for that question. And yes, absolutely. We're so proud of our commitment to ESG at Bank of America. And the $1.25 billion came about as a result of the tragic murder of George Floyd. But prior to that, we were already very engaged in our corporate social responsibility work around philanthropy, and annually giving over $250 million back to our communities throughout the country where we work and where we have business. And then when that tragic incident happened in the spring of 2020, our CEO and our leadership team said, now is the time to really step up and try to be a part of the solutions that we've been working to reach for so long. And let's put some additional resources and muscle behind some of this work. And so in addition to the $250 million we were doing annually for at least the last 12 to 15 years, this $1.25 billion commitment to advancing racial equality was added to our responsibilities. So how does that work? What does that look like? And it takes shape in many different ways, but we're being very strategic and very intentional about how we deploy those funds. Because as funders, you can imagine everybody's started getting in line to talk to you because you've got some additional resources to provide. But you can't be all things to all people if you want to have impact. And we got very focused and very strategic around how those advancing racial equality dollars would be deployed. So first we said, It was going to be directed to marginalized, underserved traditional communities, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, and Native American. So you've got to fit into those categories. And then we said, what are some of the biggest areas that we've been really grappling with for generations? And it's no surprise to most of you in this room, housing was such a big issue, and it's an expensive one. But that one really kept coming to the top. So we said 4 key areas would be addressed by this additional funding. Housing being one of them, and giving people safe, stable foundations, and will get them on track to a sustainable life. You start there with the housing. And then secondly, we said people need jobs. They need good workforce opportunities. They, backing it up, need good educational opportunities. And so we said we would zero in on working around jobs and training and giving people access to those opportunities. And this is one area, the next one, that, Bill, we hadn't really been very active in deploying our dollars around, which was health. And wow, did COVID show us the disparate impact of health and access to health that people of color were not having. And so health became one of our key areas. And last but not least, the fastest and most rapidly growing area for opportunities for people to excel in life is small business. And we aligned our focus with opportunities to help people of color get access to training and technical assistance to start their own business and to grow there. And so each region, each state gets an allocation of that funding, and we are charged, people like me and my colleagues like Hans Van Kruger from the Norfolk region, Hampton Roads region, who's here with us today, my colleague in Charlottesville, Carolyn Rainey, and our Greater Washington region. We're all given a budget to then deploy with our teammates and partners in those communities. And we started doing the work of assessing where could we put some of that funding. And one area that we focused on in Richmond was working with Virginia Union University, and I'm sorry Deidre is not here, so she could hear the fact that just last year we were able to award them $1 million in funding to start a Pathways to Jobs in the high net worth financial fields. Okay, that sounds a little self-serving. It is. People of color are not at the table in our financial services industry, and we need a pipeline of people of people of color to come into that business. And we're working with Virginia Union students to get them exposure to our high net worth areas, our private bank, our Merrill Lynch offices, get those students internship opportunities and let them see how we run that business. But in turn, we're working with them to go into the East End sections of Richmond to do financial literacy training. We're paying for a mobile unit that will go to where the student, where the need is, and conduct financial literacy courses with Virginia Union students, and work hand in hand with them to help that next generation be better financial stewards of their resources. That is an example of how we're deploying those dollars. And the other one that I'm real proud of is around working with VCU Massey Cancer Center to do cancer screening, to go into the projects in the public housing complexes in Richmond, because Danny can attest to this, people have stopped getting their health screening. And public transportation, I don't know about other communities, but Richmond is very woefully inadequate. And if you live 2 miles from VCU Massey Cancer Center in the east end of Richmond, it takes you an hour and a half to get to the cancer center, and people are just not going to make that effort when they've got so many other challenges. These mobile units that Bank of America is funding are going to go into those communities to do cancer screening and work and meet them where they are. So those are a couple of examples that I'm happy to share about how in Virginia, and there are others that I'll get to later, but I just wanted to give you a sample of.
Victor mentioned a pipeline of workers, and I can't think of a better person to talk about a pipeline of workers than Kathy Glazer, because the Early Childhood Foundation that she's been working with so long has done so much to make sure we have a pipeline of workers. Kathy will remember a few years ago I had a conference on workforce, and our speaker was Mike Petters. The largest industrial employer in Virginia is Huntington Ingalls. They own Newport News Shipbuilding. And he was coming to speak about what was important to Newport News Shipbuilding and workforce. And I thought he would talk about the apprenticeship program. But Kathy will remember, he said the #1 issue for Newport News Shipbuilding is who will be their workers in 20 years. And early childhood education was the #1 issue for his long-term pipeline. So Kathy, it seems like a perfect time to turn to you and ask you to talk a little bit about what are some of the social determinant health issues, what are some of the ways in which early childhood impacts that pipeline, and what is the role between the community and this audience, the funders, and Early Childhood Foundation. So please share.
Well, thank you for that lovely on-ramp for the conversation, Barry. And I'm sure no one would be surprised to hear me say that early childhood education, and I'll call it a twin sister of childcare, I'll use those terms interchangeably, are, really have starring roles to play in terms of ensuring social and economic mobility for folks. And it does so in at least 3 ways that I'll talk about. One is for children, young children themselves. One is for working parents. And then thirdly is for the community writ large. And so for young children, for example, we know from a strong body of research that having at least 1 year of access to a high-quality early childhood experience before they go to kindergarten yields incredible return on that investment, from their greater chances for readiness to read, being ready to step right into the K-12 system and be ready for that trajectory of school and learning, and then into the workforce. It includes increases in on-time grade promotion, completion of high school, participation in higher education, gainful employment, purchasing a home, being an active part of the tax base for their community. So there's that boost that it provides, a real foundation for all future learning for young children. I know the Jim Heckman, who is also a Nobel laureate, talks about learning begets learning. And so having a start at the earliest point in life when the most active brain development is going on, and that's really in the first year of life, first 3 to 5 years of life, sets that foundation for all future learning. It's really important that we make sure and invest in that period of time. And then for working parents, access to high quality child care so that they can get to work is a necessity. I was thinking about, Victor, all that you were saying about preparing people for work and making sure that they have access to training, be able to get to work. Parents can't work if they don't have child care.
That's right.
And so really making sure that we are ready to support our labor force for being able to support a family and really achieve the American dream. Childcare is really a very important part of that. We did a poll in December of last year. I want to make sure and get the numbers right. 68% of the respondents who were Virginia registered voters said that someone in their household, either themselves or someone in their household, employment had been impacted by the pandemic. They had either needed to leave the workforce, reduce their hours, take a demotion to be able to be home and caring for children when schools and child care centers were closed or unaffordable. And that they specifically said that that change in employment was due to lack of access to child care. A full 86% of those said that they would return to the workforce if they could access affordable child care. This is huge, and I'm sure you all know that this has been particularly burdensome for women, for mothers who have still traditionally taken that responsibility of caring for children, and so millions have left the workforce, and what a drain on our talent pool. So we really need to make sure that the affordable access to child care gets people back to the workforce and continuing to reach for their American dream. And then for our communities, families thrive. We've talked about this. It was a great conversation last night. What do communities need to do to make sure that their residents and families can thrive? We know that communities that are able to provide the resources that individuals and families need to get and remain employed, to contribute to the tax base, to get to the front lines for business and profitability, to be part of the shared prosperity that is part of living in a Commonwealth. And we heard a lot from Mr. Petters and others across the state, especially early on in the pandemic, about we've got to get our workers back to work. And at first it was about essential workers, health workers, and then others who were part of the supply chain. But in essence, in order for our businesses and our communities to be profitable, we need to be at 100%, at least 100%, with bringing talent back. And I think a big part of that is making sure that we have access to this particular resource. I've heard phrases about want to be the best state for business. If Virginia wants to be the best state to live, work, and raise a family, child care has to be part of that equation.
Well said. And you talked about the pandemic. I can't think of anyone better than Dr. Avula. Thank you for your leadership and your work for the Commonwealth during the pandemic. He was so accessible, even though he was working all over the state during the pandemic and helping to lead the Commonwealth through that process. I want to thank you for that, Dr. Avula. And also, we'd love to just hear your observations about how private funders can work in public-private partnerships to address these social and economic disparities.
Thanks, Barry. I appreciate that. I think a lot of folks in government think about foundations, think about philanthropy, and they just see the dollar signs, right? They're looking for money and opportunities to try to fund things, which is kind of silly because government has a ridiculous amount of money, right? And so what I've seen in my years working in the government space is that it is either a lack of ability to move those dollars or a lack of imagination. And I think both of those are ways that philanthropy can help. And my thinking about this really changed, 6 or 7 years ago. Our fearless leader, Mark Constantine at the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, had the board members just have an intimate dinner with Ambassador James Joseph. And he talked about the multiple types of capital that a foundation brings to the table, whereas all of the fundees were seeing just the money. Ambassador Joseph really talked about the social, moral, intellectual, reputational forms of capital. And so that is kind of the beginning. And as a quick aside for foundation executives, if you want to help your board move along or learn or really get engaged in the direction you want to take a foundation, Setting up dinners like Mark did with giants in the field is a game changer. And there were so many examples of how Richmond Memorial Health Foundation's board did that together, learned together, and galvanized around mission together. So you should talk to Mark about that. He was really masterful. But I think that was the first time that I started to think bigger about the role that philanthropy can play in coming alongside government. And the flexibility, the ability to innovate, to use money quickly, and to partner with other foundations have all made big differences. I think about the ability to convene government leaders. You know, when there are foundation drivers behind certain initiatives, that draws the community together. And so that's table setting is something that foundations can do really well. Connectivity to a broader world of best practices or expertise, right? Funding thought leaders to come into a community and start to change the conversation about how government is operating. That has been really helpful in our career. And I think, you know, all of those different ways of how do we set a table, how do we advance an agenda, how do we connect to people outside of Richmond or outside of Virginia to help move things forward. That's sort of a huge bucket of things, but I think there's a lot that foundations can do in that space along with government. I think funding innovation is another clear example because, you know, government, especially sort of the closer you get to decision makers who are on an election cycle, the harder it is to fail. And so it's really tough for government entities to try new things when there's a lot at stake politically. And so foundations, I think, can really help provide small amounts of funding that help make the case. And I'll give the one, you know, the big example I worked on as a local health director was really trying to establish co-located services in low-income communities and hiring residents of public housing as community health workers. And so this was work that we did in Richmond over the course of the better part of a decade. And it was philanthropy that helped make that possible. It was Richmond Memorial Health, it was the Community Foundation, it was the Virginia Healthcare Foundation, that all, and many others who came and said, this is an idea, we'd love to help establish it. So for about 5 years, it was almost entirely foundation funded. And in that process, we established a model, we developed a track record. Through additional philanthropic funding, we kind of clearly communicated the evaluation, the outcome metrics that would make a difference for decision makers. And then we did the work with our local governments to say, look at the model, look at the difference it's made, here are the outcomes. And local government came behind that, and now the city of Richmond funds to the tune of about $400,000 a year, funds this project, and we've been able to shift other funds and it's changed the way that we operated as a health department, right? The focus on co-located services in communities, the focus on valuing the lived experience of people living in poverty and creating workforce pathways for them to become community health workers, for them to have full-time benefited jobs, and then to use that as a ladder to go work in, in the healthcare industry and other areas. So I think that the willingness and ability to come alongside government, to find people who want to do things that may not work, and then to allow them the ability to fail and correct and fail and correct, and then ultimately come up with something that can take hold. It's a difference maker for government.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to ask Victor about what motivates Bank of America to do what they do, but before I do, I want to ask Kathy a quick question about innovation. During the pandemic, we went through a very challenging time, and she mentioned some of the statistics around the impact of the pandemic, but one of the things she didn't say is that she led an effort working with the Chamber on a plan to get Virginians back to work. And I would love for you to talk just a moment about what were some of the innovative opportunities that came out of that back to work task force that you led, thinking imaginatively about child care and home care?
Thank you for the opportunity. We learned a great deal about what I would call paradigm shifts that need to happen to make sure that as we reimagine a Virginia with a strong child care system, what does that look like? What are our top principles, or what are the things we value most? And it was a chance to really understand how the gaps in child care have always been present, pre-pandemic, and were largely invisible, I think, because of the population of folks who were providing the care, as well as the parents who were counting on subsidized child care for them to get to work. The pandemic sort of blew that opened the hood on that, and in many ways brought forward, and I don't say this dismissively, because it certainly brought a great deal of pain for many people, but I think having that broader experience expanded the lobby for understanding and recognizing the need for access to high-quality child care for all families. And so it helped us think about how do we begin to sort of change the viewing of value and that proposition. And I think it also opened the way for thinking about what needs to change. One of the things that was recognized, has long been recognized, but really now is on the table for reckoning with, is the broken cost model of child care. This idea of an expensive asset, expensive to families who are often at their earliest part of their earnings trajectory when they have young children, and an odd conundrum. I guess it's probably part of care industries where the ratio of personnel to customers is such that the fixed costs are just really high, and beyond that, the workforce is among the lowest paid across all professions. So it's this very wonky kind of funding or financing structure and cost model that needs to be reckoned with. And I think the door is wide open for innovation and testing out of strategies to try to heal, to resolve that financing problem. Part of it is for government to pay more toward the cost of services for families, but also there are many ways that the industry needs to be modernized, and ways to bring autonomous child care programs together in collectives, so that the cost of operations and some of the back office parts can be shared in shared services alliances and different types of collectives, or staffed child care models where we're bringing these small businesses together to support their services. And then finally, we have also been working with partners to develop a graduated wage scale for the workforce, to make sure that we have a stable, talented, and diverse workforce for this important industry. If we don't have teachers, in the classroom or in the home centers, families can't enjoy the services for their children. And so thinking about ways to increase the compensation to at least a competitive wage for this workforce. We need to find ways to make this business attractive for newcomers, so that we can really inject entrepreneurial and business savvy into this industry that really supports all other business, and the workforce that supports all other workforces. So I think many ways that, and there are some innovations that we've heard about from other states, or that we're testing out here in Virginia, that we'd love to see expanded and promoted.
Thank you for that answer. Victor, a few years ago I read a book entitled Why, and it was a best-selling book among business leaders, and it was also a great book just for personal growth. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it. But Victor said a few minutes ago how it's wonderful for him to, on a personal level, match his passion and his profession. All of us would hope to be able to do that. Hopefully those of you in this room are here because it's your profession perhaps, but it's also your passion. So why do businesses do what they do? And Bank of America has a wonderful story to tell around philanthropy, and I guess I would just like to ask you why. Why does Bank of America have such a robust and strong commitment to philanthropy?
Thank you, Barry. I think you teed it up beautifully in your opening remarks about the study that was done as to how ESG evolved. And we were on the early stages of that fact and understanding that ESG is good business. And if you don't get that, then you certainly shouldn't probably be in business. And I can tell you the banking industry particularly should always have a strong and robust ESG philosophy and program, because we are only as healthy as our communities are. Mm-hmm. If we have sick, weak communities, that reflects the economy, and we make our money off of how well the economy is doing. And so where Bank of America exists, we want to invest in healthy, strong, thriving communities. And we want all boats to lift with the rising tide. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is reflected in all banks' bottom line. You cannot grow your bottom line if you're in a sick, poor, declining economy and community. And so we get that. It's part of our responsible growth strategy. And our CEO, over, now 12 years ago, really laid out a clear and strategic path to success for Bank of America. And core to our values is the ESG strategy that we have. Who wants to live in a environment that is toxic and poisonous to its community? So we have a strong and dedicated commitment to the environment, to our carbon footprint, and to a net zero emissions that we want to lead and then finance, because we made a $1.5 trillion sustainable finance commitment. And this is going to be a big deal, ladies and gentlemen, going forward. And we are working with companies to help them get to net zero and financing that, and are considered one of the leading financial institutions around driving that work. And then on top of that, you heard me talk a few minutes ago about the $1.25 billion commitment on top of what we were already doing annually to advance racial equality and economic opportunity, so that all of our citizens have an opportunity to thrive and to flourish. And we want to continue to invest in that type of work. And then our teammates, Barry, I'm so proud of the teammates that I get to work, all 200,000 of us nationally and internationally, are so dedicated to giving back to their communities where they live. And the volunteerism is just, it blows your mind. We give 2 hours a week to our teammates to volunteer wherever they want to, 8 hours a month. But obviously folks go way above and beyond that. And their commitment to bringing their time and their talent to an early childhood initiative. It makes me so proud of what our teammates do. And in Virginia, over the last 5 years, we have volunteered over 180,000 hours with nonprofits in our community. And thank you very much.
That's great.
And one thing, if that wasn't all a good enough reason why we should be involved in ESG and driving ESG in our communities, I love these two reasons. It's because our new employees, they expect it of
Exactly.
us.
That's right.
These young folks and the generations that are coming in now, they're asking it
That's
in
right.
the interviews. And
That's
my private bank client teammates and my Merrill Lynch teammates have clients asking us, what are you doing to help your community?
That's right.
So if we weren't in the business, we would be forced into it. But I'm proud of the fact that this company is part of this Commonwealth that is driving and leading this work. And I'll close by saying I'm so proud of the fact, in addition to the nearly 80,000 volunteer hours, that from a corporate philanthropy standpoint, over the last 5 years, we have given away over $17 million in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank
And
you so much.
Thank you for that opportunity.
That's great. That's wonderful. I want to ask Dr. Avula this question, but I also want to prepare the audience because I'd like to spend a couple of minutes answering or having you ask these panelists or me any questions that you have. So I'm going to ask Dr. Avula's next question. We're going to turn the questions to you if you'd like. I think we're going to have some microphones that if you want to ask a question. But while you're thinking of your question, let me ask Dr. Avula, as you look at the audience today and you think about philanthropy, what are some of the initial observations you have about their role, any advice you have about their role, and how does private philanthropy play a role in providing opportunities for individuals, one at a time?
Yeah. I'll come back to the Smurf framework and using the other types of capital that foundations have, and there are kind of big gaps in the way that we deliver services as a government entity. It feels in many ways transactional, right? You apply for food stamps or you apply for TANF, and your caseworker tells you yes or no. And some social service departments or some other NGOs have kind of gone beyond that. There's been a big push towards whole family engagement, 2-gen approaches, and I think that's all right. Those are all the directions that we need to go. We've also learned a lot in this last decade about the impact of trauma on the developing brain and on how that translates into adulthood. And so here is a space where we know a lot about it. I feel like we talk a lot about it in the human services world. These are regular parts of our conversations. Yet, we have not figured out how to thoughtfully integrate trauma-led approaches into that delivery of services or into helping individuals move towards self-sustainability. And I'll get personal for a second here. My wife and I are parents of 5 kids. We're adoptive parents as well, and so our eldest is adopted. She came to us when she was 16. Has had a pretty rough life, grew up in public housing, bounced from family to family, and experienced a lot of trauma during her childhood and youth. We have had to learn a lot about what it is to parent through a trauma lens, to understand that when we act in certain ways or use a tone of voice or have a certain expectation, that does something in our Janae that, in the beginning, I had no idea how to respond to that. But after years of learning, listening, doing therapy with a trauma-informed counselor, we've learned how to support her in different ways. And she's taught us how to support her in different ways. And that has been, over the last 5 years, it's been an amazing learning for us. It's helped us be better parents to the rest of our children. My wife is a kindergarten teacher in a predominantly low-income school. It's helped her to be a better teacher. But it's also helped our Janae make different choices and choose a different course for her life. And so I've shared with some of you in this room that she, next week, is graduating from community college.
Wow.
And in the fall, will be heading to UVA. And so
That's great.
I'm obviously a proud dad sharing that story, but I also think it's indicative of what's missing from a lot of the ways that we try to help individuals and families, right? It's transactional, or it's focused on the end, which is, get trained, get a job, but there's a lot that goes into the experience of trauma and how that shapes people that we are not good enough at. And so I think that has to be a major shift in the way that we think about supporting individuals and families, the way that we deliver services. Should I share one more thought?
Sure.
Okay.
One more thought.
Incentives. Our friend Bill Hazel, when he was secretary, really helped shine a light on the issue of the benefits cliff. This idea that, we have so many different services with all of these different eligibility frameworks, but people aren't dumb. Like, if you tell me if I work a little bit more in this job, but I lose a $300 a month housing benefit, why would I do that, right? Like, that's a net negative for me. And so I saw this real time as a local health director. We were hiring community health workers at 20 hours a week. They didn't want to work any more of that because they would lose their different subsidies, and that would actually not be good for their family. So we've got to figure out how to develop the incentive structure that actually helps individuals and families want to move towards self-sustainability. And that, that has to do with real money, the way we design benefits. It has to do with workforce opportunity, right? We can't just shovel people towards jobs that don't have upward mobility, but we have to give them a vision for a career path. And so, I would put this to this group of funders. Secretary Hazel and I have talked a lot about this. Tiffany Hollins-Wright from the Fed and I connected last night. But if there are funders who are interested in helping be conveners, bring thought leaders to Virginia, and help us figure out how to address this benefits cliff, that would be a huge help to move us forward.
That's great. Who might have a question for one of our panelists? I see a hand here. I see a hand here. Whoever gets the mic first, it's a race. Okay, you win. Yes. Oh, are you going to yield? We'll go over here. All right, we'll yield to you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. Heather Peeler with Afro Alexandria, and Dr. Abula, I really appreciate your comments about the benefits cliff. That was actually my question for you, specifically around guaranteed income benefits. I love that the panel that you all talked about the opportunity for innovation when it comes to private-public partnership. And across the Commonwealth, there are so many funders like ACT that's working with our local government to create a guaranteed income pilot that provides supplemental income to low-income households to help them not only stabilize financially but move up the economic ladder. But one of the biggest challenges is the benefits cliff, that many of those households then lose the TANF, the SNAP, the child care supports that enable them to be more financially stable. So how can we work with you at the state level to address the benefits cliff that exists and come together across the Commonwealth to address some of those federal regulatory issues?
Yeah, and that last point Heather made is really important because so much of what leads to this is the constraints in the federal funding streams. So I think this is going to require a major advocacy effort at the federal level, but there are also opportunities at the state level that we have to provide state funding, or even at the local government level to provide local funding to smooth out that cliff, right? And so I think what you're doing in Alexandria, establishing demonstration projects that actually show and make a difference, and then moving to the advocacy role there, working with your local leaders and state leaders to say, hey, this is what works. We've seen this happen in Alexandria. We've seen this happen in other parts of the country. How do we then fill that gap with local and state funding? And I mean, it really does need to be an economic argument for a lot of decision makers. And so figuring out how to forecast what the smoothing out of the benefit cliff means for families, and particularly right now when the workforce is decimated. We have so many people that we need to get working. There couldn't be a better time for us to figure out some of these disincentives for families to get back in the workplace. So I think we have a great time to strike, but we do need the kind of evidence base to help move decision makers forward. The advocacy
you.
piece is going to be really important.
Good question, good answer, all within like 2 minutes. So I know you would like to ask a question. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Albert Walker. So just thinking about last night and then this session this morning, there's so much complexity here. So I appreciate the fact that you all have curated a session of working across sectors to kind of de-silo the work and to kind of be thinking emergent. And Barry, I appreciate you framing the conversation around ideas and thinking. Who knows when we'll be back together? Hopefully we'll be back together next year, but given the last 2 years, who knows what will happen? So my question to all of you in the area of working cross sectors to advance economic and social mobility for Virginians, what ideas are choke points for us now as we look at the complexity, right? What do we need to leave? What ideas do we need to abandon or jettison? And what are some ideas, some emerging ideas that we need to be thinking about moving forward?
It's a really broad question. It'd be a nice last question for the panel. So I'm going to think about that because I had a final question that was going to be similar to that. I'm trying to squeeze 5 more minutes from the audience, and we'll answer that question in our closing comments. Does anyone else have one more question that they feel like they have to ask? I will ask the panel to stay up front or to stay around so you can come up and talk to them individually, and I want to give Dr. Hazel a chance to close. But our closing question was going to be around what's one idea, what's one program, what's one initiative that we as panelists might want to focus on. If you could only pick one, and I'll just start right here and go down the line. If we could only pick one program or one idea, what would it be to improve the social economic mobility in the times that we live in? Victor, I'll start with you. Go down the line.
That's a tough question, and I'm glad I'm going first. So,
Sit next to the chair that happens right here.
There's so many phenomenal ideas out
Yeah.
there. Is that like, who is your favorite child? But Barry, I think what this conference represents and what VFN represents is that no one organization and no one entity has all the answers. And I think what we have to do more of is have these conversations and work collaboratively to address these really tough issues that we all grapple with. And if there's anything that I would recommend is that we continue to talk to each other and share. You know, in the banking industry, we are fiercely competitive. Bank of America wants to win all the business. But where that ends is when there's an opportunity to go into the ESG world and to think about the philanthropic opportunities, then I should be talking to Wells and Chase and Town Bank and Atlantic Union, and all of us should be bringing as many of our resources together to help address the benefits cliff or the daycare child issues or some of these other big issues that we are focused on, and so that we can all work smarter and not just harder to address these issues. So I don't, I know Bank of America doesn't have all the answers, but I want to be open and receptive to others who do.
So collaboration, connectivity, working together, great. One answer, Kathy.
Shocker. Good guess, Dr. Hazel. Well, of course I will say that, but I also would say it's not a competition among all these important priorities, but beginning at the beginning does make a lot of sense. I would also say, and sort of riffing off what Danny suggested as well as Victor, I think that the role for philanthropy is unique and really opportune right now. I think that we need to, bring the value. It's not necessarily the dollars that we're talking about. It's the influence, and it's the ability to incentivize best practice and to field test innovation. Anything that government can't do or is frankly not very good at. And so I think this idea of, rather than feeling like opposing forces, I think that there's a great deal of opportunity to really work closely with government to bring the philanthropic heft to influencing policy development, thinking about important investment, funding research to make sure that you can build a base of evidence for the return on investment, investing in infrastructure and data systems, testing out innovation. We've had a great deal of, we've been honored and privileged, my foundation, over the last couple of years to partner with first the Department of Social Services and now the Department of Education to help issue the federal relief dollars that have come to stabilize child care. It was just something that it was difficult for the agencies to quickly put in motion. And so I think, are now up to about $450 million that have been kind of issued to help stabilize and keep child care centers open. Danny's already experienced me giving him a buzz and saying, we got to do something about the delay in background checks for child care workers. So sorry, but it's a great partnership. And the ability of government to fund these core services can be enhanced by the push from the private sector about making improvements, making sure it's not just a blunt instrument that doesn't get to all unserved families. So that would be my
That was your one.
suggestion.
I like it. All right, Danny, you close this out. And
Yeah,
make some closing
I think one of the
comments.
things that government is atrocious at is thinking about the people that we're trying to serve, and like thinking about the experience of people trying to interact with the systems, the constraints, the processes, and in kind of the private sector tech world, you think about sort of UX, user experience, right? Like, and we just don't. And one of the ways that I've been pushed to do that in my role as a local health director has been, I described a little bit about our community health worker work and hiring residents from communities who are in poverty, and just how eye-opening it was to have them be at our leadership tables, giving us perspective about how what we're trying to do is working or not. And so if I were to name an initiative, it would be find the ways to lift up the narratives, the voices, the lived experiences of the people we're trying to help, and then figure out how to do that narrative storytelling in a way that impacts policy and process at the institutional level.
Thank you, Danny. And I want to just close by saying that the business community of Virginia recognizes it's a privilege to do business in Virginia, and the American business community recognizes it's a privilege. You're going to hear a lot about what's in the Constitution and what's not in the Constitution in the next few days and months. But what's not in the Constitution is the right for us to form businesses and do business. It's a privilege. It's a license that we get from the state, or we go as financial institutions to the federal government, and we get the privilege of doing business. So we in business need to do it ethically. We need to do it morally. We need to do it in a way that cares for the community. Vice President Harris came to Virginia on March 29th, and the headline in the papers around the state was her announcing private investment, CEOs from Virginia pledging $4.7 billion over 5 years to boost minority businesses. I think businesses in Virginia really understand our role, and I would encourage you to partner with businesses in Virginia, because they're looking for partners to implement this philanthropic goal that they have. And you know many of the programs that work. You know a lot of the opportunities in your regions that work. The business community is looking for partners. So I would encourage you to contact businesses, build partnerships and bridges to them, because this is important for those businesses. It's a priority for them. But I'd like to just close by asking you to join me in thanking this panel for the great job that they did. and turn it back over to Dr. Hazel. Closing comments. Thank you all. Bill, thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Yes, thank
That's
you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great panel. Thank you. I think when we started 5 years ago and we had the first one of these back in Charlottesville, I was just coming into my last year as secretary, and so I'm listening to this group today thinking about some of the lessons learned. You know, the definition of experience in healthcare, experience is what you got right after you needed it. And so my experience as secretary, a couple things. One is government doesn't do nuance, you know. And after that conference, we had a grad student who was assigned the task of looking at streams of funding for kids 0 to 21 in the Commonwealth. So, and we got the governor behind us and wrote a letter to all the agents and say, give this gal what she asked for. She identified, and I have to remember, my memory is fading, Debbie O. But either 152 or 162 funding streams for kids 0 to 21, not including K-12 classroom or anything going to universities, okay? 150, 160 funding streams, programs that went through 17 agencies and 4 secretariats. The total of those programs for the 2018 Virginia budget was $6.18 billion. Danny said government's got a lot of money. Now, a lot of that was Medicaid, but when you start Aid for Family Dependent Children, TANF, the Part C, all these different things add up. Now, the problem is, if you're a local official or you're the social worker at the point of service, trying to deal with the family, all of these programs have different rules and different eligibility and different time levels. And if you're a single mom with 2 kids coming into Richmond City for services in 2013 or 14, you might have to apply for 8, 10 different programs that aren't allowed to talk to each other, by the way. Now, we fund programs, we don't fund people and families in government. We don't think about where these people live. And so where we were beginning to think about in this conference back in 2017 is the role of philanthropy. You know, it's like dropping rocks in a pile, right? This program comes in and it's a lot of money, and then this next program comes in, it's a lot of money, but government in its infinite wisdom does not foresee all eventualities. These programs don't communicate, so I think we have a unique opportunity in philanthropy to fill the gaps, to be the mortar in the fence that makes it strong, to make it a structure that works, and to provide some of the communication. And that is, as Danny has pled for, some innovation and risk that we can take that someone in public office cannot take. So just, I apologize, but I had to get that off my chest. I had to get that, and the benefit cliff is very real, but that's the experience. So I have my instructions from Katie Moore here. Katie says to thank the panel. Thank you, panel. Let's have another round of applause. Very good. Katie invites you to have coffee. We have 30 minutes to grab another cup of coffee. That would be more than 1 cup, I think, in 30 minutes. Chat with folks in the hallway and make it to the breakout session of your choice. It's interesting. You said, yeah, breakout session of your choice. There are 2 up here, 1 downstairs in the Tazewell room. After the breakouts, please come back here for the closing lunch. And I think Katie wants to think a little bit about where the VFN goes from there over the lunch hour. Is that right, Katie? Class dismissed.